He was already gone in every way that mattered before his heart stopped beating, and Marcus Calloway knew it the moment he walked through the door of that hospice facility and saw his brother lying beneath white blankets with his eyes half closed and his hands resting at his sides like a man who had already begun the long work of letting go. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment without moving, the November cold still on his coat, 11 hours of Montana highway still in his bones, and he understood with the quiet certainty of a man who has loved someone for his entire life that he had not arrived in time to fix anything. He had arrived in time to bear witness. That was all. That was everything. Gerald Calloway had been the kind of man that whole communities are quietly built around without anyone ever naming what he was. He had served 2 tours in the United States Army in his early 20s, come home to northern Minnesota without fanfare or complaint, and spent the next 4 decades doing the kind of work that never makes the news, building other people's homes, showing up after storms to help neighbors clear damage before they even asked, raising his 2 children alone after his wife passed in 2009, with a steadiness that people in his town still spoke about in the particular reverent tone reserved for things they could not quite explain. He was 67 years old, and he was dying of a failure in his lungs that had progressed faster than anyone expected, and the unfairness of it settled over Marcus like weather, not sharp, not sudden, but total and unrelenting and impossible to step out of. Marcus pulled a chair beside the bed that first evening and took his brother's hand without saying anything at all. Gerald's eyes opened slowly. When he found Marcus sitting there in the low light, something in his face eased in the way that a man's face eases when the thing he has been quietly dreading does not come to pass. "You drove through that storm," Gerald said. His voice was thin but certain. "I drove through that storm," Marcus answered. Gerald's mouth moved in something close to a smile. They sat together in the silence of men who had spent too many years being too far apart, and in that silence said more than words had ever managed between them. For 3 days they talked whenever Gerald had the strength for it. They talked about their father's fishing spot on the Yellowstone and the summer Marcus was 12 and Gerald had taught him to change a tire in their grandmother's gravel lot, patient and methodical at 15 in a way that most grown men never learned to be. They talked about things that had gone unsaid for years and managed, clumsily and imperfectly, to say some of them now. Marcus would step into the corridor when Gerald tired, walk to the family lounge at the far end of the hall, pour himself bad coffee from a machine, and stand at the window looking at the parking lot below with the feeling of a man carrying something he cannot set down.
It was on the second afternoon that he first saw her clearly. An old woman in a vinyl chair by the sunroom window, a novel open across her lap, white hair soft in the gray November light, her whole posture carrying the particular stillness of someone who has made peace with waiting. She looked up when Marcus passed. She nodded. He nodded back. He did not think about her again until the 3rd morning when Gerald's son arrived and something in Marcus went very quiet. Derek Calloway came from Chicago in a charcoal overcoat and carried a leather briefcase and moved through the hospice corridor with the ease of a man who had already decided the shape of every room before entering it. He embraced Marcus warmly. He asked about the drive, the weather, the accommodations. He was smooth and considered and answered questions before they were fully formed, and somewhere beneath the surface of his courtesy, Marcus felt the faint and sourceless unease of a man watching a river and noticing that the current is moving in the wrong direction. Derek spent 11 minutes with his father. Marcus stood in the hall and counted without meaning to. In the family lounge, Derek opened his briefcase and laid documents on the low table with the calm efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the moment. He explained that Gerald had wanted certain things finalized while there was still time, that everything had been reviewed, that it was simply a matter of signatures. His voice carried the register of complete reasonableness. Marcus looked at the papers. The first transferred Gerald's lake property in Ely, 20 acres of Minnesota pines, and a cabin Gerald had spent 30 years improving one summer at a time, directly into Derek's name. The second granted Derek immediate financial power of attorney over all accounts. The third removed Gerald's daughter Carol from 2 investment accounts entirely. Marcus read each page slowly. He asked when the documents had been prepared. Derek said recently. He asked who had prepared them. Derek named a firm Marcus had never heard of. He asked whether Carol had reviewed any of it. Derek said she had been informed. Something about the way he said it, not that she had agreed, not that she had seen anything, only that she had been informed, settled in Marcus's chest like a stone. He asked for copies and walked back to Gerald's room, carrying a quietness that had nothing to do with grief. That evening he passed the sunroom and slowed. The old woman was still there in the failing afternoon light, her book closed now, her eyes on the bare courtyard trees. She looked at him when he stopped in the doorway. "You have the face of a man who has seen something he cannot unsee," she said. It was plain and direct, and offered without apology.
Marcus leaned against the frame. "I might," he said. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. Her name was Eleanor Voss. She was 81 years old. Her husband had died in this same facility 3 years before, and she returned every month to sit with residents who had no visitors, to read to them sometimes, or simply to be present in the way that presence itself becomes a form of love when everything else has been taken away. She listened to Marcus describe the documents without interrupting once. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. "Did your brother ever speak about wanting those changes?" she asked. Marcus thought honestly and carefully. Gerald had spoken over the years about the lake property going to both children. He had spoken about Carol specifically when it came to the accounts, because Carol's husband had been unwell and the family had less margin. Nothing Derek had presented matched a single thing Gerald had said across 30 years of being brothers. "No," Marcus said, "never." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Then you already know what you need to do," she said. "You are only afraid of being wrong about someone in your own family." Marcus sat with that for a long moment. Then he thanked her and stood and walked back down the corridor toward his brother's room. He waited until Gerald was most alert in that narrow window after the evening medication had eased his pain without yet pulling him under, and he sat close and spoke quietly and carefully. "Gerald," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me clearly." Gerald turned his head. His eyes were tired but present. "Derek brought papers today," Marcus said. "They would give him the lake property and the accounts. Carol would be removed from everything." He paused. "Did you ask for any of that?" The room held its breath. Gerald's chest rose and fell once, slowly. His eyes stayed on Marcus's face with an expression that had nothing confused about it, nothing uncertain, nothing that could be mistaken for anything else than what it was. His head moved once from side to side. "No," he said. The word came out barely louder than a breath, but it carried the full weight of a man who has spent his whole life meaning what he says. "I never asked for any of that." His eyes filled slowly. "I don't know what he's doing to me." Marcus took his brother's hand in both of his and held it, and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would be adequate, and he understood that sometimes the only right response to a man's pain is to stay beside it without flinching. Marcus called Carol from the parking lot that night, standing in the cold with his breath rising in small white clouds. She answered quickly.
He told her everything. The silence on her end was long and careful. When she spoke, her voice was steady in the way that people are steady when they are holding something back by sheer force of will. She said Derek had called her 3 weeks ago, told her their father wanted to simplify the estate, told her it was all straightforward, told her not to worry. She had not seen 1 page of documentation. She had trusted her brother completely. She said she would be there by morning. Carol arrived with Howard Briggs, the family's attorney of 20 years, a slow and meticulous man who read every document with the patience of someone who understood that thoroughness was the only weapon available to him. When he finished, he set his glasses on the table and looked at Marcus and Carol with the measured gravity of a man delivering a diagnosis. The documents had been prepared by a firm with no prior relationship to Gerald's estate. Multiple provisions directly contradicted Gerald's existing and legally valid estate plan. If signed, the paperwork would have redirected the lake property, the financial accounts, and the investments in ways Gerald had never authorized, in a form that would have required years of costly litigation to challenge. Howard estimated the financial exposure between $200,000 and $300,000. The documents were set aside and never returned to. Derek left the facility that same afternoon. He did not say goodbye to his father. Gerald Calloway passed away 4 days later on a quiet Tuesday morning, with Carol's hand holding his left and Marcus's hand holding his right, and the winter light coming pale and soft through the window of a room that smelled of antiseptic and something underneath it that was almost like peace. His original wishes remained intact. His life's work was protected. He left this world exactly as he had lived in it, honestly and on his own terms. Marcus returned to the facility 6 months later with yellow flowers because he did not know what Eleanor preferred, and yellow seemed right for a woman who gave her time to strangers without asking for anything in return. The nurse at the desk recognized him, and her expression changed before she found the words. Eleanor Voss had passed away 2 months after Gerald, quietly in her sleep, in this same building where she had spent so many afternoons being present for people who had no one else. The nurse handed him a sealed envelope. Eleanor had left it at the desk, she said, in case he came back. Marcus sat in his truck and opened it. The letter was written in a careful, unhurried hand. Eleanor wrote that she had not always been someone who spoke up. 40 years ago, a trusted relative had walked her through paperwork during a vulnerable time, speaking gently and confidently, and she had signed without questioning, and she had lost nearly everything she and her husband had spent 15 years building. People around her had seen warning signs. No one had spoken, not because they were cruel, but because they had told themselves it was not their place, that they might be wrong, that families were complicated, and it was better to stay quiet. She had carried the weight of their silence longer than she had carried the weight of the loss itself. She had decided somewhere in the long middle of her life that she would not be that kind of bystander. The final lines were written in slightly different ink, as though added later when she had thought of one more thing she needed to say. We do not have to be heroes to protect someone. We only have to be willing to say the uncomfortable thing. Silence is never as safe as it feels. Marcus folded the letter and placed it in his breast pocket and sat for a long time looking at the bare winter trees at the edge of the parking lot. He thought about a woman who had been hurt and had chosen, instead of bitterness, to become what no one had been for her. He thought about his brother's hand in his on a Tuesday morning. He thought about how many people are sitting in waiting rooms and hospital corridors right now, watching something unfold in front of them and telling themselves it is not their business. He kept that letter close to him for the rest of his life, not as a reminder of what was almost lost, as a reminder of what one quiet voice, offered without hesitation, can still save. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories. Every week, we bring you stories about ordinary people who choose courage over comfort and compassion over silence. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that reminds you what people are truly capable of when someone they love needs them most. This story carries real and lasting value for older American audiences. It raises direct awareness about elder financial abuse, one of the most common and least reported forms of exploitation facing aging Americans today. And it shows clearly how it operates through trusted relationships, smooth language, and manufactured urgency around legal documents. It teaches viewers that asking questions is not an act of accusation, but an act of love. It honors the courage of bystanders who choose to speak rather than stay comfortable. And through Eleanor's letter, it delivers a truth that reaches beyond the story itself. That silence, however well-intentioned, always carries a cost, and that ordinary people protecting one another is how communities survive the things that institutions cannot always see.